She said I was dangerous, possibly armed, barricaded inside my house, all because I told her she couldn't come in to look at my living room curtains. She didn't know my wife was the one taking the 911 call. That was the moment everything turned. One HOA president, one out-of-control power trip, and one dispatcher who wasn't just trained to de-escalate, she was ready to document, escalate, and flip the entire situation on its head. With every word recorded, every cost calculated, and every lie exposed. Well, this isn't a story about rules. It's about what happens when control turns into delusion, and the person you try to intimidate just so happens to know the law better than you ever will. If you've ever lived under an HOA, Karen, if you've ever had your mailbox cited or your potted plants questioned, this one's for you. So hit that like button if you've ever had to deal with HOA madness, subscribe if you believe justice starts with knowing your rights, and get ready, because this is how one curtain, one clipboard, and one calm dispatcher brought down an empire in pastel pantsuits. I was mid-sip into my second cup of coffee. Colombian roast, dark, rich, the kind that gives you hope on a Tuesday morning, when the doorbell rang. Not just any ring, that sharp, rapid-fire kind of knock that says, "I'm not here to visit, I'm here to command." I didn't even have to look, I already knew. Brenda, HOA president, self-declared guardian of decorative harmony, slayer of mailbox creativity. And on this particular morning, standing on my porch in what I can only describe as a mint green pantsuit designed by the devil himself, clipboard in hand, sunglasses that could block out logic, and a smile that made my blood pressure rise 3 points just looking at it. "Mr. Harrison," she said, lips barely moving, "I'm here for the scheduled interior ambiance inspection." Scheduled? Interior? Brenda, I said slowly, setting my mug down like I might need both hands for this, "you and I both know that there's no such thing." She bristled like I'd insulted her law degree, which she didn't have. "There's been a complaint," she snapped, "about your living room curtains." "Curtains," I repeated. "Yes, allegedly. The color clashes with the approved seasonal aesthetic. And there's speculation, mind you, that your curtain rod finials are not in regulation design." Finials. Now, if you're watching this and don't know what a finial is, congratulations, you've never lived under HOA rules. I stared at her. She stared back like this was the trial of the century. "I'm going to need to inspect them," she said. "Brenda," I replied, gently but firmly, "unless you're holding a warrant or a printed bylaw that says you get to judge my curtain rods, you're not coming in." And that was the moment her entire face twitched. Not a blink, not a flinch, a twitch. "So you're refusing a compliance inspection?" she asked, her voice now elevated to that frequency only dog whistles and Karens can hear. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't budge. "Yes," I said, "because this is my house, and because I live in a country where even HOA presidents have to knock and wait for an invitation." That's when she pulled out her phone. Not to look up the bylaw, not to file a formal complaint. Oh no. She called 911. That's right. Over curtains. And what Brenda didn't know was that the calm, steady voice she was about to reach on the other end of that emergency line was my wife, the 911th dispatcher. And that, my friends, is where the real show began. Brenda held her phone like it was the holy grail of HOA authority, thumb hovering, eyes locked on mine with the smugness of a reality show villain about to drop a plot twist. "I'm calling the police," she declared, like that was going to make me faint. And I said, "Go ahead." Now here's the part where fate, karma, and poetic justice held hands and did a little jig. Because the dispatcher on duty that morning, the one she was about to accuse me to, it was my wife, Sarah. 911 dispatcher, certified in crisis de-escalation, threat assessment, and as of now, HOA-induced nonsense. From what Sarah told me later, The call came through with all the melodrama of a soap opera monologue. 911, what's your emergency? Yes, this is Brenda McLachlan, president of the Willow Creek Estates HOA. I am in immediate danger from an aggressive homeowner who is refusing compliance inspection. He's acting erratically, possibly barricaded. I need officers dispatched immediately. Sarah muted her mic for half a second, took a slow sip of coffee, then clicked back in. Ma'am, could you please tell me what the homeowner is doing? They won't let me in to inspect his curtains. Curtains? Meanwhile, I'm still standing at my front door, watching Brenda storm up and down the walkway like she's organizing a perimeter breach. One neighbor peeked out behind a curtain. Another lowered his garage door in slow motion, like he wanted no part of this episode. 10 minutes pass. Then I hear it. Sirens. Plural. First one cruiser, then another, then an SUV, then... Was that a helicopter? Oh, Sarah, you went full procedural on her. By the time the third cruiser pulled up, Brenda was waving her arms like she'd just landed a plane. Over here, officers. He's unstable. He laughed at me when I mentioned finials. That's a red flag, isn't it? The officers approached cautiously. One looked barely old enough to rent a car. The other had that tired, this better not be a bird feeder complaint expression. I stepped out calmly, hands visible. Good morning, officers. I'm Mark Harrison. That's my house. Brenda here is upset I wouldn't let her inside to examine my curtain rods. She called 911. Twice. The taller cop blinked. Your curtain rods? Yep, finials, decorative ends, possibly too whimsical for the HOA. The officer nodded slowly, taking in the complete lack of barricades, weapons, or hostage situations. Sir, are you armed? Only with caffeine and sarcasm, officer. He cracked a smile. Brenda did not. He's dangerous, Brenda shrieked. He's harboring non-regulation textile. And this is the part where the story, our story, went viral, figuratively and literally. Because the police report? Public record. The 911 call recorded. And the neighbors? Filming everything. But that's not even the best part. You see, while the cops were gently suggesting to Brenda that filing false emergency reports is kind of a crime, Sarah, my wife, was still on shift, finishing up her dispatch log. And she flagged the call. Flagged it for misuse. Flagged it for exaggeration. Flagged it for official review. And as you're about to find out, that little flag was the thread that would unravel Brenda's entire reign. Stick around, because in part 3, the fallout file, when the system pushes back, the woman who tried to inspect my curtains will find herself under a far brighter spotlight than she ever imagined. Brenda was still in denial when the officers politely but very clearly told her to stand off my lawn. They didn't cuff her. Not yet. But they took notes. And when Brenda asked to supervise the report writing process, the younger officer just raised an eyebrow and said, Ma'am, this isn't a bake sale. You don't get editorial rights. I stood on the porch sipping coffee, still hot by the way. Watching her unravel was like watching a Christmas sweater catch a loose thread and run full speed toward a breakdown. By the next morning, the neighborhood grapevine was already in full bloom. Brenda's "he's barricaded with weaponized curtains" story didn't hold up well under daylight, or under 3 separate Ring doorbell videos posted to the Willow Creek Facebook group. One of them had perfect audio of her demanding an airlift. Yes, an airlift. And that's when the clipboard started slipping from her grip. You see, Brenda wasn't just the president of the HOA, she was the founding myth. She was the pastel pantsuit in every welcome packet, the reason our dog leash had to be exactly 6 feet, the spiritual guide of shrub height compliance. But after the curtain crusade, things changed. The same neighbors who once whispered, "Brenda will fine you for that," started whispering, "Did you see the video? She asked for special forces." Even the loyalists, the ones who used to march behind her like HOA henchmen, began to fall quiet. And that silence, that unnerved Brenda more than any complaint ever could. The next HOA bulletin didn't address the incident directly, but the tone was frantic. Titled Maintaining Vigilance in Times of Chaos, it read like a Cold War survival guide. Dear residents, due to recent challenges to the structural integrity of community order, her words not mine, we are implementing new neighborhood surveillance suggestions. All homes are encouraged to report irregular foot traffic, non-standard curtain patterns, and suspected subversive landscaping. Subversive landscaping. My wife Sarah read it aloud at breakfast. Honey, she said, I think your tomato plants just joined a radical garden cell. But paranoia has a way of attracting its own weight. Brenda started walking the neighborhood at night. Flashlight in one hand, clipboard in the other. Some say she was measuring trash bin angles. Others swear she was taking notes on garden gnome positions. Trey, our neighbor and retired civil attorney, called it midlife HOA Gothic. And then one morning, flyers appeared on every front door. Photocopies, grainy, with bold text. Protect our community. Beware non-compliant agitators. And below that, a zoomed-in photo of me, smiling, holding a cup of coffee on my porch. The neighborhood reaction? One person taped it to their trash can with a speech bubble saying, "Come for me, Brenda." Another laminated and turned it into a Halloween decoration. I wasn't offended, I was honored. I'd become a meme, a suburban folk hero with a mug of Colombian roast and questionable drapes. But for Brenda, this wasn't funny anymore. She started pacing faster, talking louder. She started losing grip. Until finally, she crossed one line too many. Because remember, my wife wasn't just a dispatcher. She was building a file. Emails, 911 recordings, flyers, HOA bylaws, annotated with color-coded sticky notes. And tucked neatly inside that manila folder was one special document. A formal complaint to the County Ethics Board. Because when Brenda faked a police emergency, she didn't just break trust. She broke policy. In Part 4, the paper avalanche, when receipts hit like a gavel. We'll see how a single folder became the undoing of Willow Creek's curtain queen. Did you ever see a fire truck, 2 police cruisers, an ambulance, and a news chopper all show up on the same sleepy cul-de-sac without a single fire, crime, or actual emergency? Because I have. It was the Wednesday morning that made HOA history. Brenda had called it in. Barricaded suspect, potentially armed, hostile. Translation, I wouldn't let her look at my curtain rods. The sirens came first. I was on the porch again, coffee in hand, dog at my feet, halfway through a crossword puzzle, when the first cruiser screamed around the bend. Then another, and then a third, blocking traffic, setting up a perimeter. Brenda? She was already outside, clutching her clipboard like a sacred relic, directing officers like she was auditioning for a low-budget crime drama. "He's in there," she yelled. "He's refusing entry. I'm traumatized." Officer 1 blinked. "Ma'am, over drapes?" The window treatments are non-complicated. Cue the confusion. Cue the neighbors slowly emerging from their homes like groundhogs, pajamas, house slippers, and coffee mugs in hand. Mrs. Henderson from across the street was holding a muffin like a microphone. Trey just leaned on his rake, like he'd been waiting for this moment since 1998. And then came the helicopter. No exaggeration, a real police chopper hovered above our block, casting shadows on the rose bushes and knocking over Brenda's patriotic garden gnome. My dog started barking. Sarah leaned out the screen door and called, "They bring the chopper for the HOA bake sale or just for curtain emergencies?" I waved to the officers, calm, composed. One of them, a young guy trying not to laugh, approached and asked, "Sir, any chance we can take a look around?" I smiled and said, "Only if you're interested in my wife's embroidery collection and a stack of Netflix DVDs from 2012. They peeked in, no barricade, no weapons, no hostage situation. Just me, my couch, a very average rug, and those infamous finials. Outside, Brenda was still spinning her yarn to anyone who'd listen. She was clutching her chest like the HOA bylaws had been personally violated by my... And it smirked at me. He refused access. Well, could be harboring irregular textiles. The paramedics, bless them, offered to check her blood pressure. She declined, twice, but still asked if she qualified for helicopter evacuation for emotional trauma. And then the sergeant spoke. He looked like the kind of guy who'd seen a lot: hostage negotiations, biker bar standoffs, and now a woman trying to activate SWAT over curtain fabric. He walked over to Brenda and said, "Ma'am, we've reviewed the situation. There's no threat, no crime, and no justification for the response level you requested." Brenda blinked. "But I felt threatened." The sergeant paused, then handed her a printed preliminary invoice. Helicopter fuel, $2,300, 0 cents. 3 cruisers, $980, 0 cents. Emergency personnel overtime, $1,600, 0 cents. False report fee, $5,000, 0 cents. Brenda's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "But I'm the HOA president. And now you're officially under investigation for misusing emergency services," the officer said. Calm, crisp, brutal. That was the moment. The moment the neighborhood finally stopped holding its breath. It was like the suburbs exhaled. You could feel it in the way someone clapped. Then someone else cheered. Even the dog down the street howled, which felt symbolic. And Brenda? She stood there, surrounded by flashing lights and disappointed neighbors, a queen decrowned by her own siren call. But that wasn't the end, not by a long shot. Because in Part 5, the Fallout folder, when receipts become wrecking balls, Sarah's case file steps into the spotlight, and this time, it's not just about curtains. Like, comment, and subscribe if you've ever watched karma ride in on flashing lights. You're gonna love what comes next. You ever meet someone who can dismantle an empire using nothing but a spreadsheet, a cup of coffee, and a headset? You've just met my wife, Sarah. Because while Brenda thought she'd weaponized 911, she had no idea the calm voice she was shrieking at was the exact person who could build a legal avalanche and never raise her tone. That same evening, after the last of the flashing lights disappeared and Brenda retreated back to her layer of pastel polyester, Sarah sat at the kitchen table, poured herself a glass of wine, and opened a fresh document. Title: McLaughlin v. Consequences, Preliminary Evidence Log. Now here's the thing, most people see a dispatcher as someone who just takes calls. Sarah sees patterns. She tracks behaviors, she logs discrepancy. She hears what people don't say. And Brenda? She'd left behind one hell of a trail. First up, the 911 tapes. Sarah had access to all of them, every word, every embellishment, every invented threat. From, "He won't let me see the finals," to, "I need a helicopter evac for stress." It was comedy gold wrapped in legal liability. Sarah clipped the audio, annotated the timestamps, and added them to a digital folder labeled Brenda Meltdown for prosecutor eyes only. Next came the emergency resource log. Fuel costs, deployment times, EMT standby rates. Sarah pulled the full cost report like a contractor pulling nails from drywall. She didn't just want Brenda cited. She wanted the city to know exactly how much nonsense cost them. Then Sarah got curious about Brenda's bigger game. Why had she pushed so hard? Why so many calls? Why so obsessed with drapes and curtain rods? So Sarah went digging, starting with HOA bylaws, the same ones Brenda had waved around like holy scripture. What she found? A slew of unratified clauses. Internal ambience audits? Not even in the 2018 update. No board vote, no resident signature, just Brenda, typing in Comic Sans. Then came the HOA's financial reports, which, fun fact, are public record under state community governance law, provided someone asks. Sarah asked, nicely. And what she got was a PDF so cooked you could smell burnt receipts. $12,000 0 cents for decorative enforcement signage. $8,400 0 cents to a landscaping company registered to Brenda's niece. And my personal favorite, $3,200 0 cents for HOA branded polos in mint green. Sarah highlighted every line, cross-referenced vendor addresses, ran INs through the state registry. 3 were ghost companies, 2 were family members, 1 was just a P.O. box in a strip mall. She wasn't making a file anymore. She was writing the prequel to How to Indict a Suburban Tyrant. And here's the kicker. Sarah hadn't even filed a single complaint yet. No threats, no announcements. Just quiet, focused, methodical data collection, while Brenda printed flyers calling us domestic disruptors and claiming we were trying to undo the moral fabric of neighborhood cohesion. Whatever that means. By Friday, Sarah had compiled a full digital folder with audio, video, financial logs, and eyewitness accounts. A cross-section map of every resident who'd received unlawful entry notices. And a 3-page summary addressed to the State Attorney General's office. Title: Pattern of Harassment, False Reporting, and Financial Mismanagement. Willow Creek. Meanwhile, Brenda was still out there, clipboard in hand, adjusting her pearls and pretending the spotlight hadn't already moved on. But it had. And in Part 6, Court of Public Opinion, When the Neighborhood Rises, we're going to find out what happens when everybody else starts sharing their own stories. Because Sarah wasn't just building a case anymore. She was building a movement. This neighborhood isn't just waking up. It's standing up. The reckoning, when the HOA president gets the bill. You ever see someone so confident, so absolutely sure they're above the rules, that you almost feel bad when the universe finally cashes their check? Yeah, that was Brenda McLachlan, our ever-grinning HOA president, queen of clipboard citations and passive-aggressive holiday emails. For months, she'd been playing judge and jury over the most ridiculous infractions. Mailbox tilt, curtain color, how many flower pots you could have on the porch. And I'd kept receipts. Every fine, every inconsistent policy, every time she let her friends break the rules while hammering the rest of us for blinking wrong on a Tuesday. But the real reckoning didn't come in the form of a confrontation. It came in the form of a man in a beige linen suit carrying a leather satchel and a very polite southern drawl. "Good afternoon, is this Mrs. McLachlan?" he asked. Brenda smiled, wide and saccharine. "Yes, how can I help you?" He extended a crisp envelope. "On behalf of Langford, Preston, and Myers, I'm here to deliver a formal notice of civil action, plus a personal invoice from our client, Mr. Harrison." I don't think I've ever seen someone's face fall that fast without tripping. "Excuse me?" "It's all in there, ma'am. Unlawful harassment, violation of state residential code, emotional distress, and of course damages incurred from the 911 stunt that backfired." Brenda opened the envelope, scanned the paperwork, and her smile cracked like old drywall. You could see the moment she realized this wasn't some angry homeowner yelling on next door. This was legal, itemized, professionally notarized. I don't understand. I was following HOA policy." He smiled gently. "Not anymore. The policy changed when over 70% of homeowners voted to dissolve the board last week. You missed the email." The moment was beautiful, like watching a dam burst, but instead of water, it was the flood of reality crashing down on a woman who had spent years pretending she was untouchable. Brenda tried to recover. She gestured toward her clipboard like it might magically summon reinforcements. "But the bylaws—" "Oh, we read the bylaws thoroughly," I said, stepping out from behind the hedge. "Turns out weaponizing HOA power for personal vendettas is not only immoral, it's very, very expensive." The man in the suit turned to me. "Mr. Harrison, if you'd like, we can move forward with the lien process today." I raised an eyebrow. "Let's give her till sunset. Maybe she'll want to avoid explaining this to the media." And I wasn't bluffing. A news van had been idling 3 blocks down since morning. The same van that had covered the curtain call 911 call. Brenda's big TV debut, now archived under When Neighborhood Power Goes Too Far. That evening, Brenda was spotted hauling boxes into her trunk. No clipboard, no smug smile, just a woman trying to quietly exit the empire she built, on HOA fear and photocopied threats. As the sun dipped behind the rooftops, I watched her drive off. No parade, no goodbye, just the sound of one more HOA queen dethroned by the very rules she wrote. Transition to part 7. They say after a storm, the air smells different, cleaner, free, and for the first time in months, our block felt like that. But just as we exhaled, the curtain twitched across the street. Because while Brenda may have left the HOA throne empty, someone else had their eyes on the crown, and they weren't just ambitious. They were worse. They were organized. A neighborhood rewrites its rules. The next HOA meeting looked different. No clipboards, no pastel pantsuits, no power-drunk monologues about multi-uniformity or the dangers of decorative garden gnomes, just folding chairs in a circle, a box of donuts someone brought from the gas station, and a whole lot of side eyes that said, "So, are we finally done being scared of our lawns?" The meeting opened not with a gavel slam, but with Trey, sweet semi-retired Trey, gently tapping a pen against a styrofoam coffee cup. "All right, folks," he said, "first motion on the table. Let's officially retire the term interior ambiance compliance. Anyone opposed?" No hands went up. A few chuckles. Someone muttered, "May it rest in peace," buried next to Brenda's clipboard. After the 911 incident and Brenda's glorious downfall by her own delusions, our neighborhood didn't just breathe again. It started laughing again. And more importantly, talking. Real talking, not just complaint whispers over hedges, but actual conversations about fairness, transparency, and the wild idea that maybe a homeowners association should actually serve the people who live there. We drafted a new charter, on Google Docs, not on parchment made of ego. We voted in a fresh board. This time, you didn't have to own a power suit or threaten to fine your neighbor over a potted fern to be elected. You just had to be reasonable, and maybe a little tired of drama. The first changes were small but symbolic. No more fines without photographic evidence and board consensus. No more anonymous complaints unless it involved actual safety. And most importantly, no one, under any circumstances, may conduct a decorative cohesion inspection. We renamed the HOA to something less militant. Willow Creek Neighborhood Council. Sounds friendlier, right? Less like a group that's going to audit your welcome mat. But it wasn't just about rules. Something deeper shifted. Mrs. Henderson, who used to pretend she wasn't home when Brenda patrolled, started baking cookies for the new board meetings. A teenager down the street offered to help older neighbors mow their lawns. No fees, just goodwill. Even the couple with the questionable Halloween decorations, they toned it down voluntarily. Because now, instead of rebellion, they felt included. Sarah and I? We watched it all unfold from our porch, coffee in hand, the same porch Brenda once threatened to cite us for non-regulation handrail height. That railing now had fairy lights, and nobody said a word except "nice touch." That was the moment I realized. This wasn't just about policy, it was about fear, and finally being free of it. Chui en moi sang fanket. But as peace settled over Willow Creek and the shadows of the past began to lift, there was still one more story to finish. Because before this neighborhood found its voice, there was a woman who stood up without ever raising hers. And now it was time to talk about her. Let's end this right, with the woman they tried to break and the quiet strength that built something better. The dispatcher and the tyrant. One last look in the mirror. Brenda didn't show her face for a while. After the city fines, the public shaming, the HOA vote that swept her out faster than a fallen leaf in a leaf blower commercial, she vanished. Some said she was at her sister's in Tucson. Others whispered about a wellness retreat in Sedona, where people yell into pillows to release their control issues. But I knew she was still here, somewhere nearby, watching. We didn't hear from her again until one Tuesday morning when Sarah opened the mailbox and found a plain envelope, no return address, just our names typed neatly. Inside was a handwritten note in tight, pointed script. I suppose some of us mistook authority for importance. Some for control. You reminded me, the hard way, that real power doesn't need a clipboard. It just needs clarity. I won't be back. But I hope the neighborhood I wanted to protect finally becomes one worth living in. Tell your wife, she handled it like a professional. Even when I didn't. No signature, but the pastel pink stationery gave it away. Sarah folded the note slowly and set it aside. She didn't say much, just a small nod. The kind of nod that comes from deep understanding and deep peace. That night, we sat on the porch as the crickets hummed their evening tune. The same porch that almost triggered a SWAT team. Now it just held 2 mugs of tea, a warm breeze, and a neighborhood that had finally learned how to breathe. A couple walked by, waved, and pointed at our string lights. "Love the vibe," the woman said, thinking of doing the same. We smiled. "No HOA rule against it anymore," I replied, winking. Sarah chuckled, then looked out over the quiet street. The same street she once dispatched emergency responders to from a console miles away, without anyone realizing she was one of the residents they were protecting. "You know," she said softly, "people think justice always looks like a courtroom or a gavel, but sometimes—" She tapped her headset, now hanging on a nail by the door. "It sounds like calm questions. And a dispatcher who knows exactly what she's doing." I reached for her hand, and sometimes it looks like a woman who gets pushed but never breaks. She didn't answer, just smiled at me. That quiet kind of smile that says everything without a word. So here's what I learned. Sometimes the loudest person in the room isn't the one in charge. Sometimes the real change comes from the calmest voice, the one who listens, waits, and moves when the time is right. Brenda thought she was a queen with a clipboard. But she forgot something important. Every HOA has rules. But every neighborhood has people. And in the end, people always win. If you've ever dealt with a clipboard tyrant of your own, or watched justice unfold from behind a headset, drop your story in the comments. Like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to be reminded that quiet strength changes everything. See you next time on the porch. Curtains optional.